Winter did not politely ask if you were ready. It showed up, and then it stayed for 5 months. No stores, no heating, no blankets you did not personally make out of an animal. And here is the thing nobody tells you about surviving a prehistoric winter. The clever solutions were not the ones that saved people. The disgusting ones did. Ancient humans got through winter by doing things that would get you removed from a restaurant today. They wore other animals. They chased fat instead of meat. They let food rot on purpose. They slept in ash. They built houses out of the dead. And in one cave in England, they did something so dark that scientists argued about it for 30 years. Let's start with the one you are already wearing a version of right now. Here is a strange way to work out when humans started wearing clothes. You look at lice. Head lice live in hair. Body lice live in clothing. They are that specialized. Body lice could not exist before clothes existed because there was nowhere for them to live. So in 2011, a team at the University of Florida did the obvious thing. They sequenced lice DNA and worked backward to find the moment the two kinds split apart. Their answer, as far back as 170,000 years ago. Now be careful with that number. It is a molecular clock estimate, not a shirt somebody dug up. The same study says it could be as recent as 83,000 years. But either way, the point holds. Clothing is old, much older than farming, much older than cities. And the first clothes were not tailored. They were a hide thrown over you and held shut. That is fine in a cool evening. It is useless at -30 because wind goes straight through a gap. So somebody solved the gap. Around 80,000 years ago, people were using bone awls. An awl is a sharp point that punches a clean hole through a thick hide. Punch a line of holes down two edges. Lace them together with sinew, and suddenly you are not wearing a hide. You are wearing a sleeve. That is the real invention. Not fabric, not sewing. The idea that a garment could follow the shape of a body and close every gap. The famous eyed needle shows up later. About 40,000 years ago in Siberia. Only about 26,000 years ago in Europe. And a 2024 paper in Science Advances made a point that surprised a lot of people. The needle probably was not invented to make clothes warmer. Warm clothes already existed. The needle was for sewing beads and shells onto them. Think about what that means. By the time people had needles, they had already beaten the cold. They had spare attention. They were using it to look good. Now imagine you have solved the clothing problem. You are warm. You are also burning through calories at a terrifying rate because staying warm is expensive. So you hunt. You get a kill. Pure lean meat, as much as you can eat. And you die anyway. This has a name. Explorers called it rabbit starvation, and doctors call it protein poisoning. Here is what goes wrong. Your liver can only process so much protein at once. Estimates put the safe ceiling somewhere around 1/4 to 1/3 of your daily calories. Push past it for weeks with nothing else coming in, and the waste products build up in your blood faster than you can clear them. You can be eating constantly, feeling full, and starving to death at the same time. Rabbit is the classic example, which is where the name comes from. A rabbit is almost pure protein. In winter, so is a lot of other game, because the animals have burned their own reserves too, which flips the whole hunt on its head. If lean meat can kill you, then meat is not the prize. Fat is the prize, and that changes who you hunt. You do not want the young, fast animal. You want the older, heavy one, because it has spent a whole summer building up reserves. A big caribou can carry something like 40 to 50 pounds of back fat alone. Treat that figure as roughly right rather than exact. It comes from popular accounts rather than a study. But the pattern is solid. And there is more hidden in places you would never think to look. Around the kidneys, inside the bones, and behind the eyes. So the picture of the triumphant hunter carrying home a slab of steak is wrong. The prize was the greasy stuff, the marrow, the organs, the parts a modern kitchen throws away, which brings us to the part that actually makes people wince. Picture a kill in late autumn. It is enormous. You cannot possibly eat it in a day, and you have no fridge. So what happens to it? It rots. slowly, in the cold, and flies find it. For a long time, the assumption was that ancient humans raced to eat everything fresh, the way we would. Then an anthropologist named John Speth spent years arguing the opposite. Putrid meat and fish, he said, were not a failure. They were normal food. And in 2025, a study in Science Advances found something that fits. There has always been an odd detail in the bones of Neanderthals and early modern humans. Their nitrogen levels are higher than eating plain meat should produce, higher in some cases than a top predator. The lead author, Melanie Beasley at Purdue, measured fly larvae. Maggots turn out to be far higher in nitrogen than the flesh they grow in. So the meat may not be what pushed those numbers up. What was living in the meat may be. Be fair to the science here. The sample sizes were small, and the team measured human muscle tissue rather than the animals people actually hunted. This is a strong lead, not a settled fact. But it lines up with something we already knew from the historical record. Plenty of hunter-gatherer groups deliberately aged meat and fish and treated the larvae in it as a bonus rather than a problem. Extra protein, extra fat, already soft. Rotting was not the enemy of the food supply. For most of human history, rotting was the food supply. Okay, you are dressed, you are eating fat, you still have to sleep, and the ground is the coldest thing in the world. In Border Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found what may be the oldest bedding ever discovered. Roughly 200,000 years old, if the dates hold up. It is bundles of broad-leafed grass, gathered and laid at the back of the cave. And it is not lying on bare rock. It is laid on top of a layer of ash. That is not laziness, that is design, doing 3 jobs at once. Ash is a fine dry powder, so it insulates you from the cold stone underneath. It also keeps the bedding clean and off the dirt, and insects cannot cross it. Fine powder clogs the way they breathe and bite, and it dries them out. Cultures have used ash as a bug barrier for a very long time. Then there is the detail that makes it look truly deliberate. Some of the burnt wood in that ash came from the camphor bush. People in South Africa still use camphor bush as an insect repellent today. And when the bedding got old and smelly and full of pests, the evidence suggests they burned the whole bed and started again. 200,000 years ago, somebody worked out a mattress, a ground sheet, and pest control. All at once, out of grass and a dead fire. Now here is a real problem. You are on open tundra in an Ice Age winter, and there is no cave. There are also barely any trees. So what do you build a house out of? In 1965, a farmer in Mezheritch, Ukraine, was digging out his basement and hit something hard. It was a mammoth jawbone. Underneath his property were 4 structures, circular, between about 12 and 24 square meters each, built from hundreds of mammoth bones and tusks, skulls stacked into the walls, ribs and tusks arched over the top, hides very likely stretched across for insulation. Read that again. There was no wood, so they used the largest animal on the landscape as building material. And these were not one-winter emergency shelters. Analysis of small animal remains found in the floor layers suggests at least one of those structures was in use for up to 429 years. 400 years is not a camp. That is a place people came back to, generation after generation, and repaired and kept. One note on the dating. It has been revised more than once. You will see 15,000 years and 18,000 years quoted. And the honest answer is that it sits in that range rather than on a fixed number, which does not change the strange part. The oldest architecture we know about is not made of stone or wood. It is made of bone. Now we get to the idea that I have to be careful with because it is genuinely disputed. What if you could not solve winter? What if there was simply not enough food? There is a shaft in the Atapuerca Hills in Spain called Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. It holds the remains of thousands of individuals, roughly 430,000 years old. In 2020, 2 researchers, Antonis Bartzokas and Juan Luis Arzuaga, examined those bones and found a pattern of damage. It looked to them like hyperparathyroidism. That matters because that is a mechanism animals like bears and ground squirrels use. It protects bone while the body sits dormant for months. Their conclusion: Spain at the time may not have offered enough fat-rich food to get through a hard winter awake. So these people may have gone into something like hibernation, in a cave, in a state of famine. Now here is where I have to be straight with you. This study is very preliminary, and it has been pushed back on. The authors themselves admitted it sounds like science fiction. Bone lesions can have more than one cause, and a pattern that looks like dormancy is not proof of dormancy. So file this one differently from everything else in this video. Not as a thing that happened, as a thing somebody found in the bones and argued for and has not yet won. The rest of what follows is much better supported. It is also much worse. In Somerset, England, there is a cave called Gough's Cave. Around 14,700 years ago, people lived in it. The human bones from that cave are covered in cut marks, not damage, not weathering. The same marks you find on butchered animal bone from the same site, made by the same tools, in the same way. And that alone would leave room for argument. Cut marks could mean a burial ritual, but the bones also carry human tooth marks. That is the detail that ended the debate. Somebody chewed them. The remains represent 5 to 7 people, among them 2 adolescents and a child of about 3. And then there are the skulls. The brain cases were not simply broken open, they were worked. The face and the base were carefully removed and the edges shaped until what was left was a bowl. The skull cups from Gough's Cave are the oldest ones anybody has directly dated. Now, the important part, and this is where most videos about this get it wrong, the researchers do not read this as starvation. They read it as ritual, a mortuary practice where processing and eating the body and using the skull as a vessel were part of how you dealt with the dead, which is, if you sit with it for a second, stranger than hunger. Hunger you can understand. Hunger is an emergency. This was not an emergency. This was the custom. So here is the question that ties all of it together. Who was actually built for the cold? Not us. Neanderthals were. Look at the body. A short, stocky torso. A wide-barreled chest. Shortened arms and legs. Heavy muscle. Every one of those is the same trick. Less surface area for the volume inside, which means less heat escaping. It is the shape cold climate animals converge on again and again. Their nasal passages look well suited to warming, freezing dry air on the way in. Researchers think they likely ran a higher baseline metabolism on a denser diet, effectively burning more fuel to hold their temperature. They were, physically, better at winter than we are. And they are not here. We are, the skinny, long-limbed, badly insulated ones. Because we did not solve winter with our bodies. We solved it with the awl, and the ash bed, and the bone house, and the willingness to eat the thing everyone else walked away from. Biology gave them a better coat. We just got better at making one. So next time somebody tells you winter is brutal, remember what brutal used to mean. It meant your bed was on a fire pit, your house was somebody's skeleton, your dinner was moving, and you were the lucky one because you made it to spring. If you want more of these, subscribe. It costs you nothing, and unlike everything else in this video, nobody has to